Hey Alexa, how are you doing today?
I'm feeling puzzled. People keep asking me who I am. It's a bit odd that they don't know already.
That is pretty sad times, isn't it? Now, the Polk React soundbar indeed supports Amazon Alexa. In the UK, it can be found for around £240, and if you get the React subwoofer as well, the package comes in for around £400. Now, I've got the subwoofer, and we'll be talking about why you might want to consider subwoofer or not. And in the US, it can be found for $200 and around $380 respectively. Now, to kick off this review, I'm going to talk about its design and aesthetics, and here I really do love what Polk have achieved. With its fabric type of look that stretches around the soundbar, it really does look more of a kind of object that can sit in any sort of living room space. Now, as for the subwoofer, it does also look pretty aesthetically cool because the Polk logo is at the top of the subwoofer unit rather than the bottom, and then the feet which extend around also just give it kind of a slightly different type of look from most subwoofer units that you'll see out there on the market. Now, moving back to the soundbar unit, I should mention that there are some physical buttons found at the top of the soundbar. These are to enable or disable Amazon Alexa, so yes indeed you can fully disable it if you so wish, although the only thing to be mindful of is that you'll have a constant red beam bar which stretches around it, like you'd find on other Amazon Alexa devices, which is a little bit cumbersome in my opinion. Now, elsewhere there's a volume up and down, which is pretty sufficient, and of course there's the remote control, which we're going to touch upon in just a bit. Now, before we go on to that, I should talk about connectivity. Now, you do have, of course, Wi-Fi because it does have to run with Amazon Alexa, and as a result needs to connect up to your Wi-Fi network if, of course, you want to run Amazon Alexa in the first place. And then you've got Bluetooth connectivity where the SBC and AAC codecs are supported, which is a nice little touch with the latter codec because it's a little bit more of a rarity at this price point. Now, as for physical connectivity, you've got optical and HDMI ARC, which is pretty much standard. However, it's a shame not to see an HDMI input, which might have been useful for those people who have different boxes or a TV which might not support a sort of communication between HDMI devices. Small little thing that you should consider here because some of its competitors might offer the HDMI in and output as well within the soundbar unit. Now, elsewhere you might have noticed there's a little connect button, and indeed this allows you to connect up to the subwoofer, but also you can add some rear speakers. I really like this fact because Polk allows you to upgrade later down the line. Say for example you can only afford the soundbar at the time of purchasing, and then later down the line you want to add the subwoofer. You go from a 2.0 to a 2.1 channel system, and then for example if you didn't want a subwoofer in the first place but you wanted rear speakers, then you can go for a 4.1 or 4.0 channel speaker system. It's a really nice little touch over here and does allow a greater flexibility over time. Now, moving swiftly on, I do quickly have to reference Amazon Alexa, and here I was actually really impressed as to how it was picking up my voice. At around 3 meter distance with the soundbar playing some music, I had no issues in terms of my voice being picked up, and indeed me able to adjust certain settings, so for example the volume settings, or for example checking out how Amazon Alexa is doing, or let's say how the weather is. Now, of course, as I did mention, you can disable Amazon Alexa, and you can also initiate it if you so wish via the remote control. Now, moving on to the remote, I really do like its sleek and stylish design. It's also very easy to hold and pretty lightweight. Now, it's also full of controls as well. At the top, you've got the Alexa button, which allows you to physically activate the Alexa button, and then you've got the inputs, TV and Bluetooth, and then you've got the bass, volume and voice. Now, quite intriguingly, the voice segment is actually different and independent from the treble EQ, which arguably might be similar in terms of what the frequency range would be adjusting over here, but I'll show you this in the Alexa app in just a second. Then you've got a mute, and then you've got the 4 preset EQs. I'd urge you to use music, but of course you might disagree and you might want to use one of the other modes. And then you've got the surround sound buttons as well, which is just quite nice because it means that you don't have to have a separate remote if you get the surround speakers with the Polk React. Now, speaking about the Alexa app, as you can see over here, my audio settings. Now, I've got the bass as -1 and the treble pretty much ramped up to the maximum. This is for my own room's acoustics and what I found to be the best in terms of sound. Now, if I were to max mount the treble, you can see that the bar indicator is towards the right side, while if I were to go on the voice, you can see it's all the way on the left side. Now, actually, in my scenario, I actually leave the voice segment at +1, and I leave the treble 1 off the maximum level. That's, of course, again, in terms of my own room's acoustics, but I just wanted to demonstrate how the voice EQ is different from the treble EQ that you can find on the Alexa app. Now, I could show you different settings on the Alexa app, but there's a lot of personal details which I shared on there, but it pretty much performs as you would expect on any other Alexa device. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's get on to a sound demo. Now, I know it's not going to be ideal because compressed on YouTube and using my microphones, which is not exactly a realistic reproduction of the soundbar, but it gives you a little taster. Now the song we'll be using is from Priya J. The song name is called Falling. You can find it down in the description below. And what I'll be doing is going to be cycling through the different modes, so you make sure to check out for the annotations. And then also I'm going to be unplugging the subwoofer and then replugging in, and hopefully my microphone will be able to pick out the different sort of bass tones.
Movie mode.
It's the only way you know how to play this game.
Sports mode.
I'm not quite sussed it yet. When I reach the brink, don't stop to think.
Night mode.
And now I'm falling.
Music mode.
And again, next thing you know, I'm crawling. I am crawling my way back to falling from so high, falling from so high. The thing is, my imagination is constantly racing 1,000 miles ahead. I'm living in my own mind, but it's flowing. I'm always hoping, but when I reach the brink, don't stop to think. I always say.
Now with the sound demo out of the way, I do have to quickly reference the subwoofer unit. Of course I'm reviewing the soundbar here, but of course you might buy it in a different sort of configuration, be it the soundbar itself or the subwoofer and or the rear channels. But here I really do love the fact that Polk have integrated a way of really communicating really well between the subwoofer and the main unit, whereby the soundbar passes off the low-end frequencies down to the subwoofer. It's not like it has its own frequency range and then just sticks at its maintaining its same frequency range, and therefore the subwoofer just comes in and bolsters that low end. No, indeed, it passes on some of those frequencies, those low-end frequencies, to the subwoofer, and then therefore allows the main soundbar unit to focus a little bit more on the mid-range or, for example, the highs. Now with that in mind, I should also quickly reference that the subwoofer unit does really bolster that low-end response. I was left pretty impressed, and despite it being pretty light and a small sized unit, it does really give you that low-end rumble that it kind of can't be portrayed via the soundbar unit on its own. So if you can afford it, I'd very much urge you to get the subwoofer unit, but I do appreciate this brings it at a different sort of price point, and indeed it might be out of your even price category in the first place. So now, throughout this review, we're going to be focusing on the soundbar unit on its own without the subwoofer connected, as if you're purchasing a £230 or $200 unit respectively. So of course, to kick off the sound quality section of this review, I do have to talk about its bass response of the soundbar on its own. Now here, the sub bass tones are really they do cut off, and you don't really get that low end pronounced sort of bass, and therefore that subwoofer really does bolster that experience. But the mid bass, on the other hand, is pretty punchy. While it can be a little bit uncontrolled at times, I did find myself pretty impressed by the overall mid bass reproduction of the soundbar unit on its own. Indeed, here it does really bolster its bass capabilities and does outperform the likes of the Samsung soundbar that can be found at this same price point. Even considering, let's say, the Yamaha soundbar that can be found on its own, the soundbar on its own here, the Polk one, is far superior. Now, as for the mids, they're a little bit recessed, but if you do dial up that clear voice function that I mentioned before, and also the treble via the app, then suddenly you'll find that the mids are actually pretty forward sounding and don't sound inaccurate, which is normally the case when you bolster the mid-range of any sort of audio device. It kind of gives you an artificial sound. Well, that's not the case with the Polk React, and in fact it actually left me pretty impressed. Vocals came out at the forefront, and furthermore just left me, well, pretty excited when I was listening to my music. Yes, it does have a degree of V-shaped size of sound signature, but on the whole, in comparison to other soundbar units which have a subwoofer, for example, then this Polk React soundbar really does sound better than some of its competitors. Now, the same could be said about the highs. They extend really well. They don't sound too sibilant or harsh, at least not to my ears, and they give you a good sort of zing at the top end, keeping you excited whilst listening to music. frankly, I was just really left impressed throughout the frequency range. Now, the same could be also said about its soundstage. The soundstage, while it doesn't have that sort of depth, the width is actually pretty impressive. In comparison to the likes of, let's say, the JBL Bar 2.1, I was far more impressed by the Polk React. It just gives you a little bit more sense of width that you're getting throughout the room. And of course, it will depend on your room's acoustics and the size of your room and the content that you're watching, but generally speaking, be it in movies or music or even watching terrestrial TV such as the news, I was just left all very impressed by what the Polk React was able to do. Of course, bearing in mind the price bracket it comes in at and comparing it to other soundbars that come in at the same price point. Now, elsewhere, I should mention that the soundbar does support DTS and Dolby Digital, which means that it will further bolster the experience if you have the relevant content, be it from, let's say, Blu-ray film or, let's say, HD terrestrial TV, which is a small little touch and one that potentially will be expected at this price point. Now, ultimately, what I'm trying to say over here is that the Polk React soundbar on its own does a phenomenal job throughout the frequency range. And of course, if you want to bolster that low-end response, that React subwoofer does that sort of job, and it further bolsters the experience and therefore comes in at a different price point, of course, affecting its sort of competitors. But even fundamentally of a soundbar unit on its own, I was left thoroughly impressed from its design, the Amazon Alexa compatibility, and of course the sound frequency that it supports. It's just all really good. And as a result, the soundbar and or the soundbars and subwoofer unit combination get my Best Buy award. Now, if you've enjoyed this detailed review, definitely do drop a like and of course subscribe. And from myself and, hey, Alexa, say goodbye.
Goodbye.
See you later, guys. Bye-bye.